Hello everybody, once again I'm Dungeoncraft Jr., aka Zorvalchan, Less Than Guru. Right here we have Mars who's sitting on my lap. He calmed down a little bit. I kind of had a false start, so he got all excited at the beginning, but then I rambled for a little while and realized I forgot to write some stuff down that I wanted to. And yes, today I actually have a little index card with some major points to hopefully, if not keep me on target, because that's extremely hard for me, and if you've watched my videos you know that, but to make sure that I hit all the points that I want to in this video. So this video is one that I guess will be, in my opinion, an important one to understand what my other probably at least 100 out of my 150 something videos out there, because I did have just some that were character creations or tutorials, but my advice, the kind of the encompassing three aspects of my advice. In my last video, I tried to call them the three pillars of making the game your own, kind of based off of the three pillars of role-playing in general, exploration, which those would be exploration, combat, and social encounters, activities or encounters, however you want to say that. But I wanted to try to use a different term than three pillars. Now I'm going to say three keys of making the game your own, but who knows, there might be some term out there that people are already using about keys of role-playing or something like that. But until otherwise, I'm going to call these the three keys of making the game your own. So there's lots and lots of good advice out there, like I've said, lots of channels of people that are either more professional than me, have been doing it longer than me, or do it more often than me, have better statistics and things like that. What I base my stuff off is my life, which over half of it has been, and I'm 48 now, so half of it, over half has been in role-playing decades since the mid 80s, coming from a small town where I read role-playing game books, but was not quite able to play as much as I want, just because 198 people, there's no other role players. You have to go to other towns to get the role players. Now it might be a little different because of the internet and webs and stuff like that. Okay, so having said that, a lot of the other channels out there also are D&D, either they cater towards it or D&D specific. And there's, as I've said, you can always mine really good nuggets of gold from those content creators. And I did want to give a list, and I kind of have it as I was kind of thinking about stuff, the channels that I watch also. I kind of wrote them, and then it was kind of subconsciously, I guess, that I wrote them more of 5th edition, kind of focused to maybe different earlier editions and stuff. So I think that is kind of interesting. I think lots of things are interesting when I do these videos. But some of the shout outs I want to give to a lot of the channels that make me think and have either changed my mind or have at least brought my attention, maybe solidified ideas, gave me a word or a term to use in which before I just knew it but didn't have a term, or things like that. So one is Bob the World Builder. Bob the World Builder, I think, is a really cool channel. He's like soft-spoken, knowledgeable, and comes across, I think people call him the Bob Ross of D&D, which would be a very good description of him. He does a lot of really cool stuff. He talks about things calmly, logically, and that. So Bob the World Builder is a really good channel. The DM Layer, I think, is a really good one. That one has little skits in the beginning. A lot of them have skits in the beginning, and then he explains kind of his view on stuff. That also is more focused towards 5th edition, but it's also a really good channel to look at. A lot of the things that he talks about, I agree with him 100% or 98%, but my conclusions and the reasons I do things are opposite. So it's like we have the same information and we use that same information to come to the same conclusion, but because we think about the games and our groups and stuff differently, we do things different. And I really appreciate that, because you don't have to agree with everybody out there. And I get a lot of, when I'm reading comments on YouTube, Discord, etc., there's a lot of people who are like, if you don't do this, or this is always bad, this is always good. If you don't do this, you're not really role playing. If you're doing this, you're an adversarial GM, and etc. And it's like, in cases, yes, but it's not always. And that type of getting different views on things, I think, is very important. So that's the DM layer. Matthew Cavill, I think, is really, really good. He has a series called Running the Game, which I've probably mentioned earlier, that I really enjoy. He's also one to look at different editions of games and put that stuff into either 5th edition, or he actually apparently enjoys 4th edition too, so he's one of the few of us who likes 4th edition. So, kind of going down the list, Dungeoncraft with Professor Dungeon Master, I think, is an excellent channel. He is one that he kind of takes the core of 5th edition and modifies it to be more, I guess you could say, lethal or grimdark, which way you want to say that, more old school. So he takes ideas and concepts from earlier D&D editions, but he incorporates those into playing a D&D 5th edition because of certain mechanics that he states, like AC going up instead of going negative for being good, things like that. So that's Dungeoncraft. And then 2, I kind of want to link together because they're both kind of OSR, old school. I call it Renaissance, but I think it's supposed to be like old school resurgence or something. It's basically when you're looking at AD&D 1st edition, old D&D BX, that type of thing. So Questing Beast is really good. One that if I don't mention, I will probably have another video talking about it, but he did a really good interview with other game designers and stuff, and was talking about them, and he's one of those that I was like listening to. He had himself and 3 other designers, world designers and stuff, and it was one that I'm like listening to them, and they're like, this is great, this is what it should be, this is what it should be, or this is how it is, and I'm just like, and then Questing Beast was like, and there's people that think of this way, but there's people that think the opposite for this reason, and it nailed it for me, and I hadn't ever thought that I was a person who liked exploration. I always considered myself more of a combat social. Those were the 2 things, the pillars that I thought. But when he explained exploration and why he viewed certain things that other people liked, and he said, yes, people like those, and that's fine. I don't like it because I'm an explorer, and I was like, wow, that like hits the nail on the head. And also why, even though I don't do a lot of D&D, I am in a current 5th edition, but I hadn't played D&D in years before that, why going to other channels that might not be in your setting can still help. And along with Questing Beast is Bandit's Keep. Bandit's Keep is heavily focused into BX and old school, old D&D, original D&D, and I think he looks at rules that were made, and he'll take you through a rule, and he'll kind of explain why people might think that that's an obsolete or old or stupid rule, and why it actually links with the game. And that's one of those things that I'm always in the back of my mind, like changing rules. Yes, house rules and stuff are great. I'm kind of doing a rewrite of Palladium 1st edition because of that, but as a game designer, as somebody who actually does this as professional freelance work, you really have to keep rules in mind, that anything you add or take away, what's the domino effect going to be? What problems or consequences of that might happen? So Bandit's Keep is also really good. So just a quick rundown again: Bob the World Builder, the DM Layer, Matthew Coville, Dungeoncraft, Questing Beast, Bandit's Keep, all are D&D in some edition channels, but they are great to mine those gold nuggets from. So, the keys of making the game your own, because my personal opinion is that is what is going to cause you to have success. You can talk about those really good three pillars of role playing, and you can know what each person likes in it. But if there's other things that are off, or there's a lack of understanding with what I would consider the other two keys, then your game, you might have a really cool campaign followed by a disastrous campaign and not understand why it's happening. How could I have this awesome campaign and then I'm doing the same stuff over here with the same people and it's not working? Why? So that's why I call it three keys of making the game your own. And I'll kind of pause just for a little note and interjection is sometimes making the game your own is doing something completely or as close to raw rules as written, close to the book as possible. Maybe that is a way make the game my group's own, because for this situation it's the best. So I do want to say you don't always have to, when I say making the game your own, I mean make sure the game that you're playing fits these things, or at least you're knowledgeable about these three keys so that when you play the game, you and your players are able to enjoy it. So, and sometimes that is just a picking up D&D 5th edition and playing it right by those rules. So, first, know your group. Know the players of your group. And that might be knowing that you don't know them. There's probably some times where if you're playing with a group of friends, you're going to do things or act differently just because you're accustomed to them. And when you play with another group, maybe it might take you a little while to open up. That's usually how I am. If you watch some of my Torganized play streams on Roll Hit Die, where I'm a player, the first few times that I play with a group, I do a lot of listening. I kind of figure out how the group dynamics work, what type of game we're playing, and stuff like that. And then there's a point when then all of a sudden kind of open up, let your guard down. That's kind of me. Even though I have all these videos on YouTube and stuff, I am kind of a shy introvert. So know the group, and if you're going to a convention for a one-shot, that's going to be different than if you're going to a gaming store. Both of them might have strangers, but the one-shot one time is going to be different than, say, you do it over the course of a couple of months in a gaming store, and that's definitely going to be different than if you're doing it at your kitchen table with your best friends that you've known for decades. All of that's going to be different, and then understanding the individuals, and that's where you got the three pillars. Is everybody an explorer? Is everybody combat? Is everybody into social? Or is it something like me, which, I'd be like, hey, I'm combat and social, and then I realize there's a lot of it that I actually am probably more of an explorer, and I do the combat, and I kind of build for combat and build for social so I can get to the exploration, which was something that kind of shocked me very recently. I was thinking about it and why I love Earth Dawn so much. So, know your group, very important. Know the people in your group, and even if that's not knowing that you don't know, you can hopefully help understand how that game is going to work to the benefit of yourself and your players. So number 2, and this one is knowing the system, because there's a difference. There is a core difference if you're playing D&D 5th edition or you're playing Palladium 2nd edition, or if you're playing Torg or Earth Dawn. Depending on the system, there might be rules in it that aren't in another one. There might be rules that kind of help a certain aspect that aren't in the other one. There's games out there that encourage what we used to call, at least I don't know how it is now or if the word is different, troop play. Troop play was where you would have everybody in the group would make characters, and then you would alternate game masters every now and then. I was introduced to that through Ars Magica. I believe it was the third edition at the time, and we even used it for like L5R, Legends of the Five Rings, for a while. We were doing a troop style. A couple of us, two or three of us, game master. Not quite everybody, but we had that dynamic where we would have characters, and every once in a while we would game master as well. So know the system. Also, there's a difference even between additions and reasoning behind that. So for this, I wanted to use an example that came up on the Tor Discord. Somebody says, "Hey, what about ammo? Do people track ammo?" And this can be a very contentious point, and that's why kind of understanding certain things about the system allow you to make logical choices instead of knee-jerk choices. Now I'm going to show the two different Torg systems. There was the I did one of them. Here it is. Okay, so original Torg 1990 and Torg Eternity, which I believe was 2017. Okay, you see it. They both have that ominous gaunt man in the background. You can barely see him here, a little more there. But you got two different Torgs. And they're both set up to be cinematic. But there's a rule about ammo that was pretty clear in here, but then people kind of wonder about it in here, and I'll explain. In Torg, the original, flatly, you did not need to count ammo. Torg was based off, and a lot of people say movies. I like to say, I like TV series better because you're taking the same characters through different adventures, and it's more than just, part 2, part 3, part 4. It's more like a weekly serial series. So either way, though, it's cinematic, and heroes and villains, when they're fighting and shooting guns, they don't count ammo unless it's important to the plot. Unless it's like somewhere in the beginning somebody's like, yeah, I just mentally count bullets in the head, and then, in my head, and that's when, blah, 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 and then later on he's like, click, click, click. Okay, now you're out of bullets, and then he jumps up from behind cover and shoots the bad guy. Something like that. But normally, they'll fire 100 cartridges at each other and never run out until, boom, it becomes important, click, last clip, etc. And that was on the drama deck. Has an initiative cards. Instead of rolling dice, you flip cards. And if there was a thing that said setback, a possible setback for somebody, because then everybody has a different setback, or similar setbacks, you could tell that person, you're on your last bullet. You're on your last magazine. Something to that effect. And I know I said bullets, and I know I said clips, and I'm going to make my brother, who's a firearm examiner, pretty pissed if he listens to this. Magazines and cartridges for clarification. But that gave it a cinematic feel. Now, in Torg Eternity, you're actually told to count your ammo. And even they have short bursts, which take X amount of ammo, and long bursts, which take X amount of ammo, etc. But this was back in 1990, where people are going off of AD&D 2nd edition, had just came out, games like that, which counting arrows in a fantasy setting was common. So this not doing it was kind of mind-blowing. Was like, boom, whoa, you don't have to count ammo. Because it's cinematic, and it made sense. Now, since then, a lot of people have come across the mentality of counting ammo is not fun, so don't worry about it, don't do it. And I won't say that that's what, D&D 5th edition or whatever say, but that's a lot of when I'm playing games doing 5th edition, Pathfinder, um, even Torg, Eternity, even though in the main book it says count your ammo. Why? And in my Torg reviews, I actually brought that up as part of the streamlining. Not everything was streamlined. You go from not counting ammo to counting ammo. Um, but here's the thing. Why? Why count ammos in a new school game where in the 25 to 30 years that have passed, people are getting to a point where they don't count ammo a lot of time because they don't think it's fun, and the mentality is if it's not fun, then throw it out, don't do it. And the thing is if you say don't count ammo, you're actually hurting the the Storm Knights, the PCs, the player characters who have taken special perks, who have spent experience to take special perks that have weapons or special ammo. Because when you have a monster hunter, which is a gothic Victorian monster hunter, they have special cartridges that they put into their monster slayer gun, and they have part of that perk that they've spent experience to get, or it's part of their 2 free ones at the beginning. They have to count it because those special rounds are special. If you have a power that shoots blasts out of your hands, or a ray gun that does the same thing, you count those because they have a limited capacity, and you can take limitations, which maybe you can only do it every other round. So if people are spending experience to buy something special, and they have to count and the normal person doesn't have to count, it's kind of a reverse logic to it. I'm spending for this, and they're just buying it on the open market or something similar on the open market, and I have to worry about it and they don't. It's my perk and I have to worry about counting ammo, they don't. And that's one of those things. If you decide we're not counting ammo, we're going to use the old Torg where that comes up only on setbacks, you might have to rethink how those specific perks that require you to count. Because if you say, well, then nobody counts ammo, not even the perks. Some of those perks, are they too overpowered then? Was that ammo limitation something that was needed to keep that perk in line with equivalent perks? And not make it you got to get this perk, otherwise you're shortchanging yourself. So that's one of the things of knowing your system. And even if it's the same continuation of a system, a different edition of the system, why a rule in one that has changed to become a different rule, whether it is streamlined or adding complexity to it, find out the reason before you just throw it away. The ammo counting thing also could be in like Earth Dawn. In Earth Dawn, there's a talent called Missile, or I think is what it is, and it allows an archer that all the arrows that they shoot, they can call them back, and that's kind of their freebie. That's their like core thing that they get at first circle. Beginning character gets, and if you take out the need to count arrows, then you've completely eliminated that as being something useful to the character, because that specifically is you can't do it with other people's, only ones that you have shot. If you're not counting ammo, you'll never need to use that. Now, are you going to give them something else? And what are you going to replace it with? There's some thought that has to go into that. So knowing the system is important. Let's see if I have anything else for that. And also, knowing the system can help you adjust, like I've said, on the fly, games that you might not have You might not want to play a specific system, but you want to play a module adventure, mega adventure, adventure path, whatever you called, from another system with that. And that can tell you how easily it can be converted. And like I've said before, in the 80s, Palladium and D&D were so close that I won't even say an experienced DM or game master, because I now would not consider myself to be experienced, but able to calculate on the fly. Armor rating of 18, AC of 2. That type of thing. So knowing the system is the second key to making the game your own. And then the third I call know the purpose. What is the purpose of the game? This one, I almost want to say know your setting, and I think the setting that you do is part of the purpose, but understand the purpose of the game. That might help you understand how you wish to tailor your game. And it's separate from the setting, because or the system, sorry. The system. It's separate from the system. You might be D&D, but and you might be a specific edition of D&D, but depending on the setting, you can have completely different ways that that's going to be played. And in older editions of D&D, and I'm going to use an example here, it's very telling. You would have actual mechanical changes depending on which one of the settings you were playing. And that was to get the mood, the feel, the purpose of that setting, and it kind of reflect into the group and the campaign, the adventures you were going on. So what I would like to say about that, the setting, I'm going to use Ravenloft as an example. So I have a lot of Ravenloft books. I actually don't have the first actual adventures, Ravenloft, and maybe the other one was or maybe it's Castle Ravenloft, and then the Return. I actually don't have those. I didn't bring it up here, but I do have the original boxed set from, I believe it was AD&D. Might have been second edition, but I did want to show this. This was an adventure module that is from... I looked it up, and then I, of course, immediately forget. But this was 1990. Okay, so right about a year after second edition came out. It has these cool maps that I have and handout type things that I've apparently cut out. A couple of, a character sheet, a book. But the thing I wanted to point out here that you see in this second edition, this early edition, this actually had a GM screen that was kind of cool, but this side was actually really, really important. And I'll come back to this because I kind of want to go in reverse order. So even though I've only minimally played 5th edition, I do like Ravenloft as a setting. So I did get the Ravenloft, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. I haven't really been able to delve into it. I looked quickly just to make sure that an old thing didn't come back, and it did not, and that's the thing that I'm going to talk about. But they have pretty cool things like random tables for horror villains, and they talk about different types of horrors, which I think is cool. Disaster, occult, psychological, slasher. So they do get into those. Those would be part of the know the purpose of your game, because if you're playing a disaster horror, that's going to be very different. The purpose is going to be different than a slasher horror, and your players understanding that, not just say, hey guys, we're doing horror, and then all of a sudden you bring in, they're expecting Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and you bring on an, apocalypse, a meteor crashes and weird stuff happens, horror. That is going to be very, very different. So all of these folklore. You get into stuff maybe like Baba Yaga and Grimm's fairy tale. That's going to be a different take on thing than a cosmic horror of Call of Cthulhu-ish type things. So actually, I just saw that would be really good information in this 5th edition book to help you determine what is the purpose, what is the setting of the game, why are we doing it, what are we expecting to have this community social fun together doing. So that was 4th edition. Or sorry, 5th edition. I do have 4th edition. This is the book that came with the box set. They called it the Shadowfell. They were going to make Ravenloft part of the Shadowfell, which was kind of a mirror image of the world, and another mirror image was the Feywild. Right before they came out with actual Ravenloft, they came out with a board game using, I believe, the 4th edition rules. But right before they were able to actually make Ravenloft a thing, they kind of went to the essentials, and then it petered out and died. But the Shadowfell, I thought that this was a pretty cool way to do things. But this is mostly just information and monster stats. Didn't really have much different mechanics. They did have a deck of cards that came with it that the game master could use to add some stuff, kind of almost like a miniature drama deck or Destiny deck, depending on if you're talking original Tor or Tor Eternity, but little things that could add to it some nastiness, because it's a dark realm for the Shadowfell. But then I didn't ever get the 3rd edition. I never was into 3rd any of its shapes or forms, but the box set that had come out that this wasn't part of, but it was, I want to say, around the time later on, 7 years later, but for 2nd edition was the Domains of Dread, which changed things from the original box set. But this was another one that kind of goes along with what I want to talk about here. 2nd edition. So we go back 3 editions if you're talking D&D, AD&D, and not BECME BX type stuff. But this here is information that changes the mechanics of the game for the purpose of the game. And that's something you might have to think about when you are trying to tailor a game to yourself. And this page here is how priests are changed, and this page here is how wizards are changed. So we have altered wizard spells, altered priest spells, and how turning undead are different. So there are certain spells that they just said, nope, they don't work. Teleport cannot cross domain borders, because if you just could teleport in and out of Ravenloft willy-nilly, then that would change the aspect of the game. Especially if you have characters in one world and you bring them into Ravenloft, which was a thing back then, there was no, well, there might have been, but in my experience, there wasn't a lot of discussions over what the players wanted their characters to do. There wasn't a push for players to go in and say, I'm not gonna play Ravenloft, so don't take me there. It was kind of the game master going, "Up, you're in Ravenloft now," type thing. For good, for bad. I can see where it could be both ways. But if the purpose is to bring characters over and keep the characters there, if they have teleport spell and they can teleport out, that defeats the purpose of that setting, of that game. So you have things like true seeing cannot reveal good or evil, only lawful and chaotic. Teleport cannot be used to cross domains. Teleport without error does not allow travel outside of Ravenloft, and you can't cross a closed domain. So a more powerful version of teleport. But then they have other things to kind of bring that dark aspect of it, that horror aspect. Spectral Hand doubles the duration, so you might not be able to teleport, but you got this more sinister-ish spell, I guess you could say, that you can is doubled. And like the priests, they have a whole different undead turning. Back then, you had all the D&D games had this chart depending on your level of the priest and what type of undead it was. You would roll a d20, and if it had that line there, it just meant that you couldn't do it. You weren't powerful enough to turn the undead. And it was a lot more difficult in Ravenloft because Ravenloft is a gothic horror type thing where you have lots of skeletons and zombies and wights and wraith specters, etc. And you don't just want the priests going in there, blasting them all and destroying them. And then things like Raise Dead. And if you fail it, it says failure on resurrection survival checks indicates that the target has become an undead creature. So you add little twists like that. Imagine the first time a player, you get all your people, and let's say you go, let's do Ravenloft. Everybody's on board to do Ravenloft. Somebody's like, I'm going to be a priest. I'm going to do this. Hopefully they would read some of this, but if they raise dead, imagine another player, being witness to them raising a zombie or a vampire or something like that. It sets a whole different tone in it. And that's not something that you see in the later editions. It was really big. I remember when I read this, I took my players through this adventure using a different system. I used Adventure Quest, which was the game that I have mentioned back in my University of Purdue days, that I really fell in love with that system. And it was close enough to D&D that I just took them right through this. But certain spells that were similar, I altered. And then when I did get them out of the game, when they succeeded, because this was one of those, even though the whole purpose of normal Ravenloft was to, if you go in, you're not going out. This one did have a out. They understood at the time that even though Ravenloft as a setting was supposed to suck you in, not let you out, that most players and game masters, or at least a lot of them, enough of them, I guess I could say, enough of them would not be happy with not being able to get out, that they had an out in this. But while they were in there, you obey by these rules. So if you have that out, that could be really interesting for a group of people used to normal rules going there, and all of a sudden rules are all different. They can't do things that they thought they could. Other things are more powerful. Other things are toned down. And then when they go out, well, all the spells and stuff they have are back to normal. So, no loss or change or well, if I knew that, I wouldn't have changed that. That would be one of the things where I would say in the game, when you have this change, normally change the rules, let the player decide if they want to keep it. And this type of thing, where they're going to go in, but they're going to come back out, I wouldn't let them change. I'd say that's just part of it. It's changed, and part of the role-playing of it is your character adapting and figuring out different stuff. And then when they go back, then you don't have to, depending on your group, who you're playing with, how you know them, you might tell them, hey, you're coming back. You might let that be a surprise. Again, depending, and how you deal with the situation. If you had people that were expressed discomfort with having all their spells changed, and you weren't in a good enough relationship with your group, you could say, hey, you're hopefully, if your character survives, they're going to get out, so all your spells will go back to normal after that. So that is a way to deal with that type of thing. Again, it's part of the three things that make the game your own. Know your group. So depending on your group, should hopefully then be able to understand, is this something that I can keep a secret that they're going to be fine with, that they'll actually enjoy? Is this going to be something that they're not going to? So I at least need to tell them, hey, I plan to do this. We're going to do a Ravenloft game. If they don't know Ravenloft, do a quick explanation of it. And everybody's on board. Boom, let's do it. And your characters are coming back, just so that you don't have to worry that choices you made that are going to get altered in a way you don't like, they're not going to be permanent. So, don't ask me to change, let you swap out stuff, because the role playing in this situation, the purpose in this situation of the campaign is for your characters to adapt, to learn, to figure things out, try to understand what's going on. Maybe they'll never understand, but hopefully they would after they start seeing that certain things aren't letting them out. Certain things to destroy undead or hurt undead aren't doing as well, and other things that have like a sinister, ghostly, undead aspect of it are more powerful. You can kind of get that in. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about, second edition Ravenloft, and I don't remember if it was in here, if it was in the box set. It was before this, but it was in either the original box set or this adventure. They talked about things and and I agree with it, that it's really hard to make players afraid. And you don't necessarily want to make the players afraid. You want the players to worry about the character surviving if you're doing a horror, if that's the purpose, and if that's something that your group likes. Some groups don't like it. Leave them away. If a group likes it, if they like that idea, they're going for it, then you can do little things to make the players worry, because you can say all the things that you want of how you can describe in detail or as vague. I tend to think letting people's minds go can bring out more horror, but you can try to do all that and they're like, it's a game. And you're not going to make a player afraid. But you can make a player wonder if their character, what bad thing is happening to their character. And one of the I'll give two examples. One is and they're like devious type things, which I enjoy. So take it with a grain of salt. This is me and my old school mentality of not being an adversarial game master, but you have, back then it was like 12 players, and they're all teaming up against you as the game master, and you're trying to keep monsters straight and everything. So sneaking in something to get them worried about, get them talking, whispering about, always was fun. It was one of the things that I enjoyed as a game master, because the majority of the time you knew that many brains working together are always going to beat you as a game master. And not in an adversarial thing, is just you've developed a plot or a story or taking them through it, and they're going to come up with crazy stuff that makes sense and works that you're not prepared for. So one of them was like just having somebody take a minor, like you're rolling dice for damage and you hit a player and you roll one, and then describing it into very big detail. Like, the monster, this monster comes up from a crypt, not quite looking like a zombie, and you don't just say it's a zombie or something, you kind of just describe it, and it hits you, and it slices down your arm in a thin ribbon, and some, the blood just starts dripping. Take a point of damage. That person's going to think a lot about, why did you as a game master describe that and it not, and then only 1 point of damage? Am I diseased? Am I cursed with lycanthropy? Am I going to become an undead? And it's just something for the game master to throw out there. Another one was to just write something like werewolf or lycanthropy on a piece of paper, fold it, you know, fold the piece of paper, but don't do it good. Make an excuse to go to the bathroom, or maybe you do need to go to the bathroom, and you just kind of put the paper there, and then it opens. Somebody's going to look at it. They shouldn't be looking at Game Master's notes. They see, and you might even put like a character name on it. Now they've all worried that so and so is going to become a werewolf or a lycanthrope or something like that. Real red herrings for the game setting, so not red herrings in the game and stuff like that. And that's just things that they ask for. I understand a lot of groups might not be comfortable with it, but again, part of your 3 keys, if you know your group, you know the players in that group, you know that they're up for stuff, or maybe they even like stuff like that. Maybe you'll write some real stuff and then they're trying to figure out what's real and fake. Maybe that's kind of an interesting metagame going on that can make the game more fun. So again, it's about fun, but different people have different types of fun. So that was an alarm because I was supposed to be doing Eternity to Organized Play, but it got canceled for this week. So that's why I'm doing this, or one of the reasons why I'm doing this video. So that is part of the knowing the purpose of the game, knowing the reasons why you are playing the game. If I'm playing Torg, that is a heroic game. I'm going to understand certain concepts are not going to be the same than if I'm playing Earth Dawn. And that's why I can have a lot of fun in Torg playing this heroic game where we're saving the world. We're the heroes, they're the villains. Clear cut, even if you're playing from Aurorsh, the gothic horror realm, reality, Monster Hunter, there's still a dark side that you're living with. It's a different type of reality that you're dealing with in the Nile Empire Pulp Hero doing. But if I'm doing that, it can be very different, and I can still have fun playing Earth Dawn, which is more of, say, old school, where you do count your ammo because of that archer. You take downtime to make armor. It's not just, boom, I hit the sword and it makes it a plus. It's like you spend weeks forging to make that weapon more damaging, where you spend time researching. You don't just grab a magic item and use it. A lot of times it's a thread item. You have to figure it out. You have to figure out the lore behind it. Who possessed it before you? What is its name? Who was its creator? Certain conditions for it, and those allow you to link to it. And the more you link to it, the more threads, what's called like the higher rank of threads you have to it, they're known as thread items, the more powerful it becomes. It's a whole different mentality, a whole different purpose of you're doing it, where everything is kind of tied together. And that's different than my Palladium, even though that's kind of old school. That's a lot different than my Palladium, which is more first edition, which is like a AD&D Beck-Me type game setting, thought process, using a different system. Basically, Palladium first edition is AD&D with mechanic changes, rules changes, the way spells work, the way psychic powers work, etc. So, but you still have kind of that mentality. There's levels, character classes, races. There are, what do I want to say? Different levels, experience needed to get to the same level depending on what character class you're playing. So there's differences in that way as well. So knowing the purpose of the game can really help you, especially if you're playing the same group, but you're doing a different purpose of the game, and to make sure that everybody can have fun. And as an example I brought up before, I failed a couple times trying to do riffs. We were playing Palladium First Edition, and most of the people were having fun, understood it, and then it's like, hey, let's do Rifts. And people went into that thinking that it would be similar to Palladium. And Palladium 2nd Edition had not come out with, which is closer to Rifts. But if you go from an AD&D type thing, which is more, even no matter how powerful stuff is in Palladium 1st Edition, it's no comparison to how wacky wonky it can be in Rifts. And even people that had played Robotech, which were used to MDC, the MDC was lower numbers, and there wasn't a fantastical aspect to it. There wasn't a fantasy aspect, no magic or anything. It was just big mecha Robotech, Veritex and Destroids and stuff like that. You go to Rifts, and it's gonzo. It's wild. It's out there. Everything's super, super. The highest things that you would see in Robotech would be multiplied by a lot, except for the SDF one's main cannon, which was just, and I remember it because the damage of it, instead of being like 18d6 times 100, it was destroys absolutely everything in its path of fire. It's a half a mile wide and X many miles long. Boom, just didn't matter how much you had, it destroyed it. I remember that to this day, over 30 something years, almost 30 years later, 25 to 30 years. But other than that, everything was all jacked up in Palladium. More attacks per round, more damage, more MDC taking damage and stuff like that. Very different. And going into it with everything's in a SDC, or everything's in a hit point world, except for armor, which has SDC, but even characters didn't have in Palladium 1st Edition. And in Robotech, where you're in your mech, and you probably don't do a lot of stuff outside, and one thing's going to kill you, one mega damage is going to kill you, but you're in a army type situation, so you're pretty much always going to have your mecha. Very different than Rifts, when you start off with a group, and one of them is a dragon, and one of them is a dog boy, a genetically humanoid dog that their armor is only partly covering them, and a dragon which has the mega damage, which has the super hit points. Basically, one SDC or hit point is equivalent to 100. One mega damage, MDC, mega damage capacity, is equivalent to 100 hit points or SDC. So it takes 100 hit points or SDC to equal 1, and this guy has a few hundred, and this guy here is in armor that has 100, and then this guy here has some armor that has 25. And it's only covering part of his body, like if he's a Cyber Knight, I believe actually had an armor rating too. Palladium's all complex. If you're a person who knows the Palladium system, you understand what I'm saying. If not, sorry, it's going to be really hard to explain it in this video. But basically, it's just, there's lots of different things, and it's a lot of out there-ness that is different, even though the basic rules are the same. They're both Palladium systems. They use the same mechanics, but the purpose of those games, the settings of those games, are different. So that's basically what I want to try to do, and what I wanted to try to do in this video was explain my 3 keys to making the game your own, and why I personally think that they're very important, and why each one of them has its place. As much as I agree with the 3 pillars of role-playing, that is so focused towards just D&D. I mean, it can be used in any system, don't get me wrong, but when you're just talking D&D 5th edition, 4th edition, 3rd edition, whatever, 2nd edition, that book, that one book, the player handbook, GM guide, monster manual, or that series of books, it's fine, it makes sense, it's understandable. When you start changing things and you start going to different systems, and when you start looking at different mechanics from the system, or you go from one setting in a system to a different setting in the system, when you go from Forgotten Realms to Ravenloft that have changed the rules, or the new 5th edition, which I showed you, which shows you the different types of horrors there can be. When you look at Aurora, which I just did my unboxing, this is the same system, the same setting, different realities. If you're playing this, you're expecting heroes to always win. You're expecting pulp action, Indiana Jones, The Mummy, Brendan Fraser version. You're expecting that type of stuff. You go here expecting this, and you're gonna die, and people are gonna, and they have complained about it. That's not Torg. Well, yeah, it's part of Torg, and this is part of Torg. This by itself is not Torg. This by itself is not Torg. The wonkiness is having these different realities crashing. This is a horror campaign. When Batman goes into horror, it's different than the comic books where the horror is part of the comics and is the pulp hero stuff. This is Batman going into Friday the 13th, Hellraiser, Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, that type of stuff. It is going into Dracula, not Dracula coming into Batman and having the comic. Batman actually going into, Dracula, Frankenstein, gothic horror, bad gothic horror, even Ulysses Spila. They say it's not Cthulhu-ish, but it has some aspects to me of that, of horrors beyond understanding and your imagination, but it's a very different thing. So I will go ahead and end that here. Hopefully you've been able to get some nuggets out of here. I don't know if it's gold, maybe it's just some copper or two, but if so, please subscribe. I currently, as long as nobody has left, I have 55 subscribers, so that is really cool. I appreciate every one of you for subscribing. Whenever I see the little count go up, I'm like, whoops, at least somebody else has liked one of my various videos. And when somebody says that I've helped them in any way, whether it's doing Torg on Roll20, Palladium on Foundry, one of the tutorials, character creation, a lot of people have commented on those, which was surprising because a lot of those was more of me just churning to get through it after about like 10 days of doing that was getting a little tedious, but I wanted to make it, and I did. Or just these videos of thoughts and discussions about games and different philosophies. But again, I am Dungeoncraft Jr., aka Zorgalchan Less Than Guru, and until next time, I will catch you later.